I tell you that, and I say that also to Mr. Vito, I deplore that we have to come to a resolution that is saying that there is no sufficient progress. Our idea, and I think also of Michel Barnier, was that in October we could see sufficient progress. But Mr. Weber is right when he is analysing the situation. If you are at the other side of the negotiation table, there is a lack of clarity. There is even disunity. There are oppositions between Hammond and Fox. There are oppositions and divisions, I should say, between Johnson and May. It is difficult to make sufficient progress, and it's difficult to make the steps towards the second phase of the negotiation. So I deplore, in fact, that we are not capable to put for you before the plenary another resolution than the resolution of today. But on the other hand, it shows also the unity among ourselves. And I hope that we can keep, Mr. Vito, this unity in this House. And even that you can join this unity when there is the vote within a few moments. Because this unity is absolutely needed. Parliament and Council, so not only Parliament, Parliament and Council, for once, I have never seen it, I have to tell you, in my political life, are going beyond national difference, are going beyond party obediences, and are really defending, together with the negotiator, the interests of the citizens in all 27 member states. And so my call to you and to everybody in the plenary is join this unity. Let's keep this unity. And in that respect, dear colleagues, I have three worries, 3 points that I want to that I think are needed to be addressed in this debate. The first is Northern Ireland. I have to tell you, I went to Northern Ireland. I was never in Northern Ireland. I was never in Belfast. But I went there, and I thought, yeah, it's already 20 years, not longer on our television screens. Problems are solved. It's a little bit like Berlin. The Berlin Wall, it disappeared, and everything goes well. Well, I can tell you, it was a shock to come in Belfast. Because the reality is that the problems are not over. There is peace due to the Good Friday Agreement, but there are still these tensions. There are fences of 12 meters high today in the 21st century. And I have to tell you, this Good Friday Agreement, to keep it is key. It's a ceasefire. It's a little bit a guarantee of a frozen conflict. And the worst thing what can happen is that we lose the peace that Europe has brought there in Northern Ireland with the effort we with the European Union have done. I stand next to these memorial monuments of young people, I stand there next to memorial monuments where you see the pictures of young people of 15, 16 years old who died in a conflict based on nationalism, based on extremism. And so to secure that this violence doesn't return, that is, I think, an absolute priority for our House. And that means, why not? And it's a question that I put forward to the negotiator. Why not this Good Friday Agreement attached then as a declaration to the withdrawal agreement that we are going to secure? And also, to be sure, let's not return to a border there on the island of Ireland, because then the violence will certainly return. So my second worry is about citizens' rights. So, you know, these so-called deportation letters that had been sent by the UK authorities a few times ago. There has been excuses by the UK government saying that it was a mistake, but I have difficulty to believe it. And why I'm saying this? When it comes to collectively securing the rights of EU citizens living in the UK authorities tell us that it's not possible. They don't know them. They don't know where they are. Well, it concerns to send a deportation letter, they find them. Yeah. And they find their addresses. So I don't think that really we can accept, and I want to tell that in all honesty and very calm, a situation in which 3 million of our citizens will need to ask for a settled status in Britain with a huge administrative burden. Our proposal is very simple. Let's recognise this collectively. Let's give the same rights for the people living in the UK now, EU citizens, as they have now. And let's do exactly the same for the UK citizens living on the continent. I'm asking myself, President, why we are still discussing this. This can, in fact, be solved immediately, recognizing their rights, recognizing the rights of all citizens. Finally, on the financial settlement, I will not repeat what you have said. We are fully in agreement with you. You cannot pay with 27 what has been committed by 28. And so, to conclude, my last phrase. It's true, Theresa May, Mr. Fito, have made a number of clarifications in her Florence speech. Not enough, let's be honest, also for you to say that there is sufficient progress. So what I'm hoping is that in her address now, tomorrow, in the Congress before the Conservative Party, she will bring further clarity, so that based on this further clarity, concrete proposals can be put on the negotiation table towards Michel Barnier. And finally, I hope for really, also from the ECR group, for a massive support for this resolution at the vote at May Day. Thank you.
Per il gruppo confederale.
For the confederal group of the United European Left, Nordic Green Left, Mrs. Anderson.
In all of its parts. That includes the parts where the consent of the people of Ireland, north and south, would be required to alter the constitutional position of the north. It includes the agreed areas of cooperation, environment, agriculture, tourism, health, transport and education, plus it allows for more. It includes the Bill of Rights, rights resisted by the DUP, and also, importantly, it includes conformity with EU law. The Good Friday Agreement in all of its parts includes, as this resolution recognises, being in the single market and the custom union. Britain should remain in the single market and the custom union, but if it does not, then the north of Ireland must. There are different ways that this could be done. In some form could mean the north of Ireland staying in the EU, or it could mean Irish unity. And the Good Friday Agreement has provisions for a unity poll, a right to decide. Otherwise, we are not upholding the Good Friday Agreement in all of its parts. This resolution is balanced with regards to citizens' rights and the financial settlement, and it is an important step forward in recognising that the requirements of the north of Ireland are different from those in Britain, hence the need for special status or the need for the special circumstances to be taken into account. Finally, I would like to welcome the comments from Guy Verhofstadt that we will explore how to give the legal protection to the Good Friday Agreement in the withdrawal agreement. If you support the Good Friday Agreement, if you support the peace process, then please support this resolution. Thank you all.
Per il gruppo Verde, Alleanza.
For the Greens European Free Alliance Group, Mr. Philippe Lambert.
British citizens, my fellow European citizens, the clock is ticking, and you know where we Greens and European Free Alliance wanted your country to be, to remain at the heart of the European Union, but a majority of those British citizens who voted decided otherwise. And while we accept the result of the referendum, this decision will produce no winners. Not only the business we do with one another, but the interests of both the UK citizens and the EU27 citizens will be harmed by the separation. You know, it's British citizens who come to see me every week to alert me as to the damages that will be inflicted to your healthcare system or to the quality of your research in your top universities, where so many EU nationals are working day in, day out. And above all, both British citizens in the EU27 and UK citizens on the continent have been thrown in total disarray, and the Europeans in the UK having started experiencing administrative vexations without Brexit having even started. If we want to limit the inevitable damage that will be caused by this lose-lose situation, we should waste no more time and negotiate in good faith. But make no mistake about it, no deal by March 2019 would be the worst deal for everyone and first for respective citizens. Allow me at this stage to point to two contradictions in the positions of your own Prime Minister. the first concerns Ireland. How can she say, on the one hand, that there will be no border, and on the other hand, that she will take out the United Kingdom from the customs union, from the single market and from the jurisdiction of the ECJ? This will create a border, and I don't know where to place it, and at the same time respect the Good Friday Peace Agreement. The second contradiction is this idea that in order to make Britain global, it needs to cut its ties with the countries, its closest neighbours, with whom it shares history and geography. Rather than an impediment to be global, to be honest, I believe the European Union is the only way for European countries, including former imperial powers such as yours, to have any influence in a world where it barely represents 1% of the population. In the 21st century, more than ever, size matters. Let me conclude with a few words on democracy. As your Prime Minister explained, the decision to leave the European Union as a statement as to how you want your democracy to work. I take exception with the idea that only if the UK would leave the EU, decisions that affect your daily lives would be taken by people directly accountable to you. Who adopts EU law? On the one hand, this European Parliament, who is elected by and accountable to the very same people who elect your national parliaments. And on the other hand, the Council, that is 28 governments who are accountable to their citizens via their national parliaments. In other words, every EU law is decided with people directly accountable to you sitting at the table and taking part. But let's be frank with one another. What seems unacceptable to some is that in certain cases, Britain might be outvoted. That, I'm afraid, is a rule of democracy, one that your own government has no qualms invoking by remarkably overruling the majority of the pro-Remain majorities in Scotland and Northern Ireland. If democracy can only be had at nation-state level, I know many regions who would immediately aspire to become one. And indeed, and if a democratic union is possible, Mr. Farage, between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, then it certainly can be possible between European nation-states. Dear friends, a majority of the British voters instructed Her Majesty's government to negotiate Brexit. Let us respect that democratic vote and do just that without further delay. But if we want to be fair to those same citizens, let them, or at least those people who have been elected to represent them, have the last word on this story. When confronted with the result of that negotiation, who knows what they might ultimately decide. Thank you very much.
Per il gruppo Europa della Libertà della...
For the Europe of the direct freedom and direct democracy, Mr. Farage.
The really important issue of Brexit, I think European citizens, those that do take any interest in what happens here, will be stunned that Mr. Juncker comes here for his one appearance in the Strasbourg session this week, and there is absolutely no mention made of the dramatic events that have taken place inside a European Union member state that is allegedly a modern democracy. Now, one of the reasons that I always wanted Brexit was because I thought the system of lawmaking, whereby the Commission has the sole right to initiate legislation, was something that would in fact damage and in the end destroy any concept of national democracy. And yeah, I've called the European Union undemocratic, I've called it anti-democratic, but never, ever, in my fiercest criticisms here, did I think we would see the police of a member state of the Union injuring 900 people in an attempt to stop them going out to vote. Whether or not it was legal nationally for people in Catalonia to have a vote, surely people are allowed to express an opinion. We saw women being dragged out of polling stations by their hair, old ladies with gashes in their forehead. The most extraordinary display. And what do we get from Mr. Juncker today? Not a dicky bird. In fact, previously we had that the rule of law must be maintained, and I think it is quite extraordinary to realise that this union is prepared to turn a blind eye. Can you imagine if the British police were to have roughed up a couple of Scottish National Party protesters, or if something happened against a pro-Brexit rally, you'd all be screaming blue murder. Indeed, the calls would be that the United Kingdom must go before the European Court of Human Rights, and yet with this you don't even want to talk about it. And knowing as I do your advanced plans, 7 of you, member states here with your military police, your Euro gendarmerie force, all I can say once again is thank God we're leaving. Brexit was an act of liberation. It was a voice of national self-determination that cannot and will not be stopped. But through this negotiating process, I'm afraid from the start, you've treated us as if we're some kind of hostage, that unless we pay a ransom, unless we meet all of your demands, then you won't even have an intelligent conversation with us about trade heading on from here. There are no guarantees that whatever Mrs May says or does, that you will ever, even when we've met your demands, that you will ever come to us and want to have a sensible trade agreement. And I have to say that it is sad, in fact it was pitiful, to see the British Prime Minister in Florence. I've heard you saying that she's been conciliatory, that she's been grown up. People are happy with what she said. Actually, Mrs May, I'm sad to say, isn't worldly enough to recognise that when you face up to a bully, the one thing that you do not do is try to appease them. She's begging you to give her a transition period, and there's no guarantee that you will do it. So I do actually agree with the criticisms that I've heard around the room about the mixed messages coming out from the UK government. I just hope that in Manchester, the Conservative Party start to say in public what they're all saying to me in private, that she's a waste of space, she needs to go. We need a proper Prime Minister who says to Monsieur Barnier, OK, here's a deadline, here's a date, we work towards that date. If we can't reach a sensible deal on trade and everything else, then we are simply leaving and reverting to WTO rules. This charade cannot go on for year after year. After all, we voted Brexit.
Per il gruppo Europa delle Nazioni della Libertà.
For the Europe of Nations and Freedom Group, Mrs Atkinson.
I agree with everything Nigel has said. The British people listen to you and they hear that you want us shackled to the ECJ and they say no. The British people see that you're getting an EU army, and given what happened in Catalonia on Sunday, most of you so-called leaders were silent on this matter. You saw what was happening with the violence against its people, its women, and some of them are children. And they wonder what it will be like under Mrs Merkel and also Mr Macron when they get their hands on the guns and the tanks. The British people say no. The British people say no. They voted to take back control of our borders, and you say no. The UK said yes to leaving the single market and the customs union, so you should just cut a deal on a free trade agreement. But you can't. Has Mrs May met Mrs Malmstrom, our resident former sociology lecturer who's in charge of trade? She's incapable of saying yes or no, because she's never worked in business. Last night at the Conservative Party conference, a former Brexit minister, with the Brexit secretary, David Davis, in the audience, said that the Brexit department are drawing up plans for a no deal. Well, listening to Mr Barnier today, they'd better get on with it, because that's what's going to happen. And Mr Webber, you say who should you call in London? I agree with you. Mrs May will be gone soon. I suggest you get Boris or Jacob on speed dial. And Mr Verhofstadt, don't lecture us and try and rewrite history on Northern Ireland. I think it's you that's inciting violence sitting in this chamber. Last June, we voted to take back control of our laws, our courts, our borders and our money. Anything else is a betrayal of 17.4 million people. Watch and learn from Catalonia.
La parola onorevole Dodds, non iscritta.
Mrs Dodds, not attached.
Sorry. I will focus on only one aspect of the resolution today, and that is my constituency, Northern Ireland. I am encouraged by agreement in Brussels, London and Belfast that there should be no hardening of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. I am encouraged by reports of fruitful progress on the issue of the common travel area. However, it is not flexible or imaginative to claim that a trade solution can only be found if Northern Ireland remains inside the single market or the customs union. Let's be absolutely clear. Northern Ireland's Brexit solution will be part of the United Kingdom's Brexit solution. There can be no question of a deal that cuts us adrift from our most important market and erects barriers within the United Kingdom's single market. The interlinked nature of the Brexit negotiation means that we need to move swiftly to phase 2 of the negotiation for a full resolution on this issue. Northern Ireland is not a bargaining chip in these negotiations. Genuine concerns in my constituency should not be exploited in pursuit of every British pound. And finally, a word to Mr Verhofstadt, who claimed that Europe had brought peace to Northern Ireland. Peace in Northern Ireland was hard fought and hard won by its people and by the bravery of its security forces in the face of an awful terrorist campaign that killed thousands of our people. Europe has helped, but it has not been the sole arbiter of peace in Northern Ireland. Thank you.
La parola all'onorevole González.
Mr. González Pons.
President, after listening to Mr. Farage, I've left behind the speech that I prepared because I have to answer to him even if he's going to leave. My country cannot accept lessons on democracy from somebody I don't consider to be a democrat, and the proof that he's not a democrat is that he isn't even staying to listen to me. Mr. Farage means that I'm happy to see Brexit happening, because thanks to Brexit, we'll have the extreme right gone from this House. The only good thing of Brexit is we won't ever have to listen to Mr. Farage again. If he wanted to do a favour to the separatists in Catalonia, he's done the opposite, because I'm convinced that those who are endeavouring illegally to achieve independence in Catalonia, the last thing they wanted was the support of the extreme right in Europe, which demonstrates to all of us what is really happening in Catalonia and what the government of the country is facing. You had an opportunity to talk about Brexit in the UK, and you didn't seize it. You prefer to talk about Spain rather than the UK, because concerning Spain, aside from shouting, you've got nothing to say. And talking about the UK, my parliamentary group is concerned, like Mr. Farage, about Northern Ireland, and very concerned for Northern Ireland, because it's a special problem that requires a special solution and is going to demand the best of us. Honourable members, contrary to what Mr. Farage said, and some separatists in Catalonia, Spain is a consolidated democracy, a loyal partner, a good friend of the whole European Union that requires the help of everyone. And the only ones who we don't need are this extreme right, however much they want to join the party. Thank you.
La parola all'onorevole Gualtieri.
Mr. Gualtieri.
Thank you, President. We are now in a decisive moment of our negotiations. A lot of time has been lost, and we now see a more positive dynamic. At the same time, a number of fundamental issues remain yet to be clarified and problems to be solved. For this reason, it is very important that the message that comes from this Parliament is clearly heard and understood. A positive conclusion of the first phase of the negotiation is possible, but we are not yet there. The Parliament is and will be open and constructive in its assessment, but we are and will be equally firm on our principles. First, of course, a full safeguard of citizens' rights, which is our first priority. The positive principle of direct effect of the agreement must be underpinned by an effective mechanism which allow the Court of Justice to ensure a consistent interpretation of its provision. Second, as we are safeguarding existing rights and not discussing future UK immigration rules, we will not accept to depart from any of the current provisions, in particular about future family members of eligible citizens that should have the same right as the current family member, about the declaratory nature of documents, about the need to avoid any burdensome administrative procedure, and on the possibility to export social benefits. On Ireland, our resolution is extremely clear, and on financial settlement, it is extremely important that the now shared principle, apparently, that all commitments made by the UK during its membership of the Union shall be honoured, this principle is implemented fully and consistently. On the basis of this short, let's say, analysis of the points, it is clear that despite some positive steps forward, a lot of work is still required in order to move to phase 2 of negotiation. So, as we say in the resolution, unless a major breakthrough takes place next week, the European Council should postpone its assessment of sufficient progress. By stating this obvious element, we are not closing a door. We are pointing out to a way forward that is fair for both the EU and the UK. In this respect, we have to be clear on the transition. First, it can be discussed and agreed only after sufficient progress on the withdrawal agreement. Second, it should be based on the full existing EU regulatory, budgetary, supervision, judiciary and enforcement instruments, and should of course fully include the free movement of citizens. Third, while some objective links between withdrawal agreement and transitional phase might be explored, any attempt of buying access to parts of the single market through concession on the financial settlement would be rejected. So we are in the middle of a very difficult journey. There is only one path clearly laid out if we want to get to our final destination. The path is the one indicated by the EU, and we will follow you, Michel, along this way.
La parola all'onorevole.
Mr. Nicholson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, President. For decades, during some very dark times, Europe was a good friend to Northern Ireland, without taking any side. I will always remember at the time of the ceasefires in '94, when I went with my other two MEP colleagues from Northern Ireland to meet with Jacques Delors, which brought about the peace programme, and during that time over €2 billion as extra funding to Northern Ireland and to the border counties in the Republic. However, in this resolution, to me, it's clear that you're now taking sides in Northern Ireland, Mr Verhofstadt. And let me make it clear to you, Mr Verhofstadt, the peace in Northern Ireland was won by the leader of my party, now Lord Trimble, and the leader of the SDLP, Mr John Hume, who took the brunt, and indeed took at the time when the other party leaders representing on both sides in this House, who are now the lead parties in Northern Ireland, stood on the sidelines and did nothing to help to bring peace in Northern Ireland. And in fact, they have messed it up big time, which doesn't make the situation we have today any easier. Shortly after those ceasefires, can I say, by calling for Northern Ireland to remain in the single market and the customs union with the rest of the United Kingdom, Mr Verhofstadt is essentially calling for an international border to be placed between Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain. Let me make it very clear. I will not accept any attempt by anyone in this Parliament to use Brexit as an excuse to break up my country. At its heart, this proposal goes against the Belfast Agreement. The Parliament is mandated to protect and defend. The Belfast Agreement is clear. Northern Ireland is a full part of the United Kingdom, and we entered into the then EEC as one United Kingdom, and we will leave the European Union as one United Kingdom. This is, Mr. President, a sad day for me. If the Parliament supports this text, it will be turning us back on decades of good relations with all communities in Northern Ireland. You can no longer, Mr. Verhofstadt, be deemed to be neutral after this resolution. That is your mistake. It's a huge mistake. And today I have heard nothing new. Unless we have a change in the direction this is heading, we are heading for a crash. Thank you.
La parola all'onorevole.
Grazie, Presidente. As
Thank you,
Chair of the Petitions Committee, it's my responsibility and duty to listen to and respond to the concerns of EU citizens. My committee has received a large number of petitions expressing grave anxiety about citizens' rights in a post-Brexit era. They all have something in common. They are all the result of the insecurity people feel caused that they have been thrown into due to a very unclear withdrawal of the UK from the European Union. Some of them have tens of thousands of signatures. From also the perspective of the Conference of Committee Chairs, let me just express that there is an immense task we are all aware of in front of us for all the committees. I know how important it is that realism and pragmatism is allowed to inform and shape the debate and the negotiations, and we are lucky to have an excellent negotiator in Michel Barnier. In this context, the European Parliament proposal of a transitional period is very much welcomed because it ensures that we have sufficient time to ensure that we have an orderly and civilised divorce at the end of the process, where citizens' rights are secured, both for the EU citizens residing in the UK and vice versa, the UK citizens residing on the continent. And I really look forward to a more dignified debate after this. I pay attention to Mr. Farage, who has now left the room, that he is not willing to discuss Brexit. He wants to discuss anything but Brexit. I think it should have been raised as a point of order, and she should have been made aware by you, Mr. Chair, to actually pay attention to what the subject is for today.
Ms. Spinelli. Thank you very much, President. This joint motion for a resolution we're about to vote on is one in which the European Parliament will express its opinion, namely that it is too soon to talk about progress on the behalf of European citizens, and the situation in respect of Northern Ireland remains unresolved. Now, we need to look at what will happen once we consider that sufficient progress has been made. We have a principle whereby nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Will we then be willing to ask the United Kingdom to put their whole future on standby whilst awaiting that final agreement in accordance with that principle? I fear that the government will take advantage of Brexit to rein back many freedoms here. I very much hope that there will be no compromises in this regard. We must protect the status of all European citizens with absolutely no strings attached, no conditionality. It is therefore crucial that we beef up the rights in other chapters that remain to be negotiated. We don't yet have any legal certainty, but we need concrete guarantees to safeguard the rights of millions of citizens. Thank you.
La parola
Mr. Smith.
President, thank you. I'm struck as ever by the unity of purpose across the Council and the Member States, and indeed across this House amongst the EU27. I commend our coordinator, Michel Barnier, for keeping that unity in check. But where the EU is united against the UK, I assure you the UK is anything but united. I represent Scotland was in this House. We desire to remain within our family of nations. 48% of the UK population want to remain. The idea that Theresa May leads a united government is a risible proposition, as we see on a daily basis from our own colleagues who are treating her as a Viking longship, that they're going to float out into the North Sea having piled as much nonsense onto it as possible, and then they'll set fire to it. They're fighting amongst themselves like ferrets in a sack, while the UK's national interest, however we define it, is ignored by them utterly. Shame on them. It is not good enough for Europe, it's not good enough for the UK either. And from Scotland, we agree with the tone and content of this resolution. We have seen nowhere near enough progress on citizens' rights, on Ireland, or on the financial settlement. On citizens' rights, I'm receiving emails on a daily basis that would break your heart. People who have made choices about their lives, about their residence, on the basis of rights which they face being taken away. Our first duty in this House is to them. On Ireland, North and South, Scotland's close neighbours and friends, solutions are possible. Solutions could be found, but we need to see a lot more seriousness from the UK government than we have seen to date. The Good Friday Agreement is fragile, it must be respected, and we need to see seriousness from the UK administration. And on the financial settlement, it says just how far the UK's reputation has been trashed, that the idea the UK will meet its financial obligations is news. Global Britain's first act is to walk away from international financial contributions. It is just not a serious prospect, and I fear for the future unless we see some real seriousness in these discussions. Scotland wants to find solutions, colleagues. We must see more seriousness from the UK in that endeavour. Thank you.
Mr. Batten.
Mi chiedi che se è una polemica, come non ho dato la parola.
Now, if there is any kind of dispute with other countries, I'm not going to give you the floor on that, because this is a debate on Brexit. Spain is a democratic country, and it has fought against a coup d'etat. Felipe González and Suarez have built a great democracy, so let's not have a war of words in respect of another country. There's not the time and place for that. Thank you.
About Spain. It's not about Spain, sir. It is disgraceful, I may say it, disgraceful that European politicians should exploit the tragedy of Northern Ireland for their own purposes. That is a disgrace. I think it is a point of order that we are not discussing. Well, if you're...
La parola all'onorevole...
I now call Mr. Batten.
Onorevole, io sono abituato...
I am used to respecting all members of the Parliament, but members must also respect the Presidency in return. So absolutely I gave you the floor to comment on an item of the agenda. That's what you said, but it's unacceptable, the point you just made. Mr. Batten, please.
Thank you very much. Now we're here to discuss the state of play of the negotiations and what progress has been made. Well, very little, and there are two main reasons for that. One, of course, is that you don't want us to leave. You're going to do everything you possibly can to make it as difficult as possible, to delay it as long as possible, so that either we end up with a very, very bad deal or we reverse the decision of the referendum. The second reason, of course, is Mrs May, who simply doesn't have a clue. She has neither the courage, the will, nor the resolve to actually see these so-called negotiations through. But Mrs May has made some very serious and dangerous concessions already. What has she actually said? 15 months already after the referendum, nothing much has changed. She intends that we should leave the European Union on March 2019. We will leave the Commission, we will leave the Council, we will no longer have members of the European Parliament. We've left, but nothing much very changes. Nothing much at all changes. She said that we are going to incorporate all EU law into UK law, and then she wants another 2 years transition period, which will take us up to 5 years from the referendum, during which case nothing much changes on immigration, the laws don't change, and she has made one very, very, very dangerous concession, which is talking about an EU treaty on security and defence. We will continue to be bound to your military ambitions. We will continue to be bound to your security policy and foreign policy, and to all the police and criminal justice measures like the hated European arrest warrant. She has not got a clue, and what she'll end up with is a withdrawal agreement whereby we leave in name but we do not leave in reality. Now, Mr Barnier, Mr Juncker, I don't understand why you don't actually make it easy for us to leave. Why don't you kick us out as quick as possible? Because then you can get on with your ambitions for full economic, financial, political and military integration. You can create your United States of Europe, make it easy for us to go so that we can get on with pursuing our freedom and independence, prosperity and our future in the world, not in the EU. Do yourself and us a favour, please.
Onorevole Wilimski.
Mr. Wilimski.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in June 2016 there was a referendum in Great Britain on the leaving the European Union, and 52% said yes, we want to leave it. A year and a half of chaos and bewilderment since on both sides is something that has not been professional. It looks like a children's nursery. I simply appeal to you, respect this democratic people's decision, and let's not play any funny tricks here. What you can hear in the corridors now is that there's a long-term plan to keep Britain in the European Union, with a second referendum, with slow negotiations, and a few more tricks of this kind, undermining this popular decision and boycotting it. I appeal to you, therefore, to respect the British people's decisions, deal with it fairly and professionally, make sure that neither side suffers disadvantages from this, and make sure that countries like Austria don't have to pay a single euro more as a result of this.
Mr. Wolf.
Mr. President, Abraham Lincoln famously once said, "You can fool some of the people all of the time. You can fool all of the people some of the time, but you can never fool all of the people all of the time." Well, the British people are no longer fooled that the EU wants to negotiate a fair Brexit agreement, or even negotiate at all. From Verhofstadt to Juncker, to Barnier and to Tusk, the message is clear. The EU will delay, damage and deny Brexit. When President Tusk says the UK can't have its cake and eat it, what he actually means is the EU wants its cake, our cake, the morning croissant, afternoon tea, and finishing it with taking a pound of Britain's economic flesh, washed down with a glass of subsidised EU Chianti. As Shakespeare said, this England never did, nor never shall, lie at the feet of a proud conqueror. It's clear the EU will not change its tune, so it's time for the UK to walk away and end this charade. Thank you.
Honorable Brok.
Mr. Brok.
Herr Präsident, Herr Kommissions...
President of the Commission, President of Council, colleagues, dear Michel Barnier. Well, listening to this debate, you seem to be suggesting that we were the ones behind Brexit, not yourselves. I think that is a misreading of the situation. I would echo what Michel Barnier has said, however, namely that we are now operating in a better climate than we were in the past. Some progress has been made, not sufficient, but nevertheless we have made certain advances. And I think that we should be clear about the fact that we are engaging in damage limitation right now, but some people here want to cause damage and they don't want us to negotiate sensibly in order to try and limit the damage. There are issues, of course, relating to citizens' rights, to the financial settlement, as well as to Ireland. But we also have to say that we cannot endorse a negotiating strategy whereby financial issues would be deferred until we start to talk about a free trade agreement. It is in our mutual interest to resolve financial issues. I mean, there's no talk of anybody holding anybody hostage or to ransom. And Jean-Claude Juncker has called on all parties to stand by the agreed negotiating line, and that is the right course. And if we are able to resolve outstanding issues, then we can have a transitional arrangement for a limited period of time in order to win time for a free trade agreement or whatever the UK wants. But, you know, we're still not really sure because, I mean, I have the impression that they are drawing up memos whereby they want to retain some kind of membership of the single market without shouldering any of the commitments that go hand in hand with that. I do hope, however, that we will arrive at a sensible result, and we certainly shouldn't be blown off course by all of this propaganda. This House has been extremely constructive, and we want to have a positive relationship with the UK in future, and that's what we're working towards. Thank you very much. Mr. Corbett.
It's increasingly obvious to all that the negotiations are not proceeding as fast as they should and have no chance or little chance of reaching the stage of being able to move on to the second phase. It's also growing increasingly obvious to everyone where the blame lies for this. The chaos, the confusion and the divisions within the British government. A government which is now a minority government, having lost an election on a platform of going for a particular form of Brexit that the public did not support. Mr Barnier will recall the very first meeting of the negotiations. 1 year after the referendum, the British government did not put a single position paper on the table at that meeting. And here we are, 6 months after triggering Article 50, we have no agreement on the issues in the first phase of those negotiations, despite David Davis, rightly or wrongly, accepting the sequencing that was proposed for those negotiations. This is just not good enough. Now, the motion for resolution before Parliament hopes that progress can still be achieved by the next meeting of the European Council, only 2 weeks away. There is indeed another negotiating round. I suppose this hope is based on the fact that maybe after the Conservative Party conference has finished this week, there may be some movement in the Conservative government. I would say, don't count on it. Mrs May's Florence speech was not so much to improve and clarify her positioning for the negotiations with the 27, it was to improve her negotiating position within the British Conservative Party, and it has clearly failed even to do that. They are still at loggerheads, they are still divided, and sometimes I wonder whether they don't even want to move on to the second phase of the negotiations because they do not yet know what kind of relationship they want to secure for the future. They're still too split, they are still at loggerheads, and there is still no clarity on that from the British government. Thank you very much.
Honorable Henkel.
Mr. Henkel.
Thank you. Well, I would like to make it very clear from the beginning. I was against Brexit. And Mr. González Pons made the point that after Brexit, people like Farage are leaving this parliament. Well, I would like to remind you, not only him, but all British people are leaving this parliament. And these are the last advocates in this parliament who are in favor of competitiveness, of decentralization, and of self-responsibility of a country for its debts. But it was, and let's not forget it, it was the Junckers, it was the Broks, it was the Verhofstadts in this parliament who carry a lot of responsibility for the Brexit in the first place. It was their mantra for more Europe, more centralization, more socialization, which led to the referendum in the first place. And it was their inflexibility on the immigration issue which gave the arguments for the Johnsons and the Farages to swing the results towards Brexit. To minimize the damage, we now need to do 3 things. First of all, Mr. Verhofstadt, people like you should stop this arrogance vis-à-vis the British voters. Secondly, Mr. Barnier, you should stop giving the impression that you want to punish the British for their decision. And here's a message to London. They should really get their act together and come up with a stable and unified government to face this Commission in this critical phase.
La parola, onorevole Berger.
Mrs. Bearder.
Sorry. So, Mrs May's never felt at home in the EU. Well, she's not talking for me, nor the millions who voted to stay in and still want to stay in. We have millions of EU citizens who need clarity now with a standalone agreement, whatever the negotiations deal. But what Mrs May really meant is that the Brexiteers in her own party haven't bothered to find out the benefits of the EU. They stay at home and think that the British Empire still owes them a living. Mrs May is surrounded by Brexiteers. They're in control and she is too weak to deal with them. Brexiteers constantly blame Brussels for their own failings. They said, in the EU we can't control our borders. Well, that's nonsense. We can manage EU migration. We just haven't adopted the laws to do it. They say they have a plan for Ireland, but so far nothing. They said the EU stops us making trade deals, but we've over 50 international trade deals now. So where is the vision for Brexit? May's Florence speech has left more waffle, fudge and half-eaten cake on the table than is good for anyone's cholesterol. Prime Minister, get a grip, or pack your bags and leave now. We can exit from Brexit, so allow those of us who do feel European to sort this mess out democratically. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honorable Scholz.
Mr. Scholz. Thank you, Mr. President. Not far from Berlin, somebody said on the negotiations, there was only one thing that was important for him: freedom of movement for workers throughout the Union. Production, development, this is one of the British world companies we're talking about, which needs to have a clear legal guarantee of that right in the future. So, Commission and Council, be specific. Identify specific problems. Where are the interests divergent? What will happen after and during the 2-year transition period? Delegations from the islands are traveling all around the world, WTO Public Forum, for example, trying to prepare future free trade. But the legal basis for that is totally ignored. Our future treaties and agreements with the United Kingdom must be constructive. There must be, these issues must be addressed as part of a world commercial trade.
Alla parola.
You have the floor.
Chair, as we debate the Brexit negotiations here in Strasbourg, back in Manchester, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson is preparing to deliver his speech to his party conference. He encapsulates the disaster that Brexit is for my country. He was complicit in the biggest lie in the history of British politics, and with his Tory cronies has used Brexit as a power grab for himself. In her Florence speech, Theresa May said that the United Kingdom has never felt totally at home in the European Union. Personally, I have never felt less at home in the UK since the vote to leave the EU. Such a sentiment is echoed by many people, by the majority of young people who still consider themselves European, by people living in our diverse and multicultural cities, and of course by those European citizens who have chosen, for reasons of love, work or study, to make the UK their home. If Brexit is a divorce, then we are the children of the divorce, and the process is a painful and troubling one.
Honorable Flynn.
Mr. Flynn.
Thank you. The Commission's attitude to the wishes of the British people to leave the EU has been a disgrace. You would apparently rather harm other European nations by placing trade in peril than meet your own obligations to be constructive. If you were truly confident about what the EU has to offer, you would be content to let go an unwilling participant in the process of ever closer union. But instead you wish to punish us to discourage the others. Poles and Hungarians dismayed by migration bullying, Greeks and Italians disgusted by the consequences of monetary union. Britain is holding out the hand of friendship, confident of its place in the world, connected to a Commonwealth and to an Anglosphere, as well as to European neighbours. You, by contrast, are the hollow men, afraid that our success will show up your failings. We will not be intimidated. We will not be deterred. Once again, we will set an example to Europe. We are going to show that being free, democratic and truly global can see a great future for our country.
Domnule președinte, stimați colegi.
President, dear colleagues, it seems that we become addicted to Brexit. We don't have any plenary without discussing Brexit anymore. So I'm going to leave aside political logic and talk normally. In invoking Article 50, the politicians spoke, and now the negotiators have to do their work. If we in the Parliament try to get involved in the negotiations, Brexit will never take place. The interest is for the separation to take place with ease, without problems. And of course, Brexit is unprecedented because it's the first member state to leave the EU, and then maybe others will follow. At the same time, any member state who goes out might want to come back. So the European Union cannot follow the United States. We need a more dynamic model. The EU can only survive if there's a balance between central powers and local powers. And it's clear now that change is moving faster than our procedures, which are slow and centralized.
Honourable James.
Morning, everybody. Well, it's certainly Bash Up the Brits Day, isn't it? And can I give the Parliament here a gold medal for political bullying? Because that's quite frankly what we've heard so far. A number of people have referred to the lack of clarity of documents coming from the United Kingdom. Can I remind everybody that there was an agreement between both parties to keep those details confidential? And it's taken individuals in this Parliament to divulge and criticise the United Kingdom because we have not been forthcoming. Well, I've got more faith in my politicians that abide by confidentiality agreements than I have by a number of the individuals in the Parliament this morning. Now, one of my political colleagues back in the United Kingdom during the referendum campaign made a very, very strong statement, which is the United Kingdom should not be a star on somebody else's flag. It quite clearly appears to be that this Parliament wants to erase the United Kingdom from the flag, but it wants to keep everything that the United Kingdom contributes, be it money, be it defence forces, be it knowledge, whatever it might be. Well, if you want that, go back to the negotiating rules. Go back and understand what negotiation actually means. It means giving a bit to get something back in return. You have not given one iota. It's all very well holding 27 member states together in terms of unity, but quite frankly, what we're seeing now is a facade and theatre from the Parliament in terms of the negotiations. They are not serious, and the sooner this country, the United Kingdom, leaves, the better. Thank you.
Onorevole James, per sua informazione.
Mrs. James, the stars on the European Union flag don't represent the member states. Mrs. Hübner.
Thank you, President. I speak as the chair of AFCO committee, which in a year from now will be working hopefully on the consent procedure of this House. Michel Barnier said in his introductory remarks that 15 days
and one negotiation round separates us from an important meeting of the European Council that will debate and decide. That meeting will be a chance for the European leaders to take stock of the results so far and decide whether to expand the negotiating mandate, allowing for parallel discussions on the future agreement and the transition. But maintaining the new dynamics of the negotiation process depends heavily on whether the Prime Minister's speech in Florence will get translated into new negotiation positions and concrete proposals as soon as possible. Accelerated rhythm of meetings has to go hand in hand with progress on content. And on content, 4 points. We need reassurance on how direct effect will work in practice. We need reassurance that bureaucratic burdens will be avoided. We need also to avoid the risks of incoherence and distortions in interpretation of the withdrawal agreement. And we need to see the respect of the fact that the situation of Northern Ireland is unique and deserves to be treated in a unique way. We all want to reach that deep and special partnership that Mrs. May has called for and which is of interest for all European citizens. But lack of progress now would delay the whole process of negotiations. That is why reaching confidence now and shared understanding on the essential issues of the first phase is of such importance. Thank you.
La parola onorevole Bresso.
Is it Bresso?
Grazie.
Thank you.
Di nuovo, grazie, Presidente.
Once again, thank you very much, President. First of all, I want to say that I very much appreciate the clear indications we've had from President Juncker, namely that the European Union should continue dealing with specific proposals for the future of the European Union and pursue that debate. And I would say to UK colleagues that it's not true that we want to keep you, but it's important that you listen to others. We listen to you, but I don't think you can say that we haven't listened to you. I think that our negotiators were very clear, and I very much appreciate the work that has been done. And I want to speak to 2 points. First of all, the question of the rights of European and UK citizens and their fate following on from Brexit. Now, the agreement, which of course will be part and parcel of the overall agreement, and the sooner we can explain to people who are waiting for some certainty, the better. They've been left hanging. Second point I want to make is that, of course, there is an issue relating to Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement, and obviously we have to preserve freedom of movement for people of Ireland, and we also have to preserve the integrity of the single market. And as things currently stand, it would appear that those two musts are mutually contradictory and will be difficult to reconcile unless, of course, the UK and Northern Ireland therefore remain within the customs union. Now, there are other proposals, of course, but it's up to the UK Prime Minister to make the first move and come up with specific proposals. There may be a transitional period, but that does not mean that one can then postpone any solution.
Dembski.
Mr. Krasnodębski.
Micro.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The speech of Theresa May in Florence brought about hopes that negotiations with the UK will finally accelerate, and this is what EU citizens expect. One ought to positively perceive an approximately 2-year transitional period and the fact that the EU will still pay its contribution towards the budget for the years 2014-2020. It seems that the aspect of safeguarding the rights of EU citizens living in the UK will be appropriately dealt with. Now time has come for the EU to take a step forward. We in Poland recently worry more about the rights of our workers in France than the rights of Poles living in the UK. The paradox of those negotiations lies in the fact that talks about the free market and the free movement of people take place whilst within the EU Under the slogan of fighting social dumping, internal protectionism within the EU is becoming ever more evident.
This week there's a visit from Copenhagen to London.